My husband's betrayal didn't just shatter my life. It stole everything I held dear. He swore I'd never rise again, but a dusty suitcase under a motel bed held a secret that didn't just change my future. It rewrote my entire past. Just 7 months ago, I had it all. A loving husband, a secure job, and a best friend I trusted with my soul. Now, I was living out of a rundown motel room, paying by the week, surviving on $2 meals, trying to piece together a life from the wreckage. My husband, Justin, had been sleeping with my best friend, Natalie. Who knows for how long? When I stumbled upon their affair, my world imploded so fast, it felt like a coordinated attack. My job vanished within 2 weeks. The divorce left me with nothing but broken promises and a hollow ache. Friends, well, they just stopped calling. I went from stable middle-class comfort to absolute rock bottom in less than 2 months. It was a free fall, and I couldn't find the ground. I was sitting on the edge of that squeaky motel bed, eating instant ramen with a plastic fork, trying to drown out the noise of my own thoughts when I saw it. Tucked away in the dust under the bed, an old brown leather suitcase with brass corners. And there, on a luggage tag, my full name, written in a precise, careful script I instantly recognized. It was my Aunt Helen's handwriting. Helen, she had died 9 months earlier, the eccentric aunt everyone called difficult, even paranoid. Now, her suitcase was here. I pulled it out, found a tiny key taped to the bottom, and with trembling hands, I opened it. Inside, $7,000 in crisp cash, and a plane ticket, but then a note. A handwritten note that didn't just offer me a lifeline. It ripped apart everything I thought I knew. It warned me, don't trust Justin. Don't trust Natalie. It said they'd been plotting my downfall since before my wedding day. And the most chilling line of all, my mother's death 6 years ago wasn't an accident. The note directed me to a mysterious address in Portland, where the real fortune was waiting, ending with a stark instruction. Finish what your mother started before they silenced her. Aunt Helen, the crazy one, had spent her final years collecting evidence, while everyone else just laughed. Now, she was giving me a choice. Take the money and disappear, or use it to fight back against the monsters who destroyed everything I cherished. I'm Samantha Garrett, and before my world imploded, my life seemed perfectly normal. I had a cozy 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood where people still knew each other. Mrs. Chin always smiled. The maintenance guy actually showed up. It wasn't luxurious, sure. The walls were thin, the carpet stained, but Justin and I had painted the living room together, built IKEA furniture, hung our wedding photos. It was home. I worked as a marketing coordinator at Brennan & Associates. Not my dream job, but it paid the bills. $48,000 a year plus benefits. Enough for rent, groceries, and an occasional dinner out where we pretend we had more disposable income. My boss, Marcus Brennan, was professional distant. He'd praise my work, but never promote me. He'd ask about my weekend, but never truly listen. I'd been there for years, consistent, reliable, but stuck, and I never questioned it. I showed up, made sputtering coffee, sat at my desk, and did my job. It felt stable, predictable, safe. Justin? He was a business consultant. His schedule was erratic, but I thought that was normal for his field. Late nights, weekend trips, calls at odd hours. He'd come home exhausted, kiss my forehead, eat leftovers, and pass out on the couch. I'd cover him with a blanket, a strange mix of pride and loneliness warring inside me. Proud of his ambition, but aching for more time together. We met 7 years ago at a dinner party, or so I believed. He was charming, attentive, funny. Asked for my number, and I played it cool, even though I was buzzing. Our courtship felt effortless, like we were always meant to find each other. Dinners, walks, lazy Sunday mornings. He proposed after 18 months, right in the park where we'd had our 3rd date. I said yes without a second thought. Why would I say no? But over the last 2 years, things had shifted. Subtle things. Justin became fiercely protective of his phone, angling away from me, taking calls in other rooms, face down on the table during dinner. His work projects became vague. He started picking fights over the smallest things. The dishwasher, organic vegetables, even how much time I spent with Natalie. Natalie, my best friend since college. We'd been broke students, sharing ramen, dreaming of our futures. She was my maid of honor, weeping alongside me in my wedding. She helped us move, lugging boxes, making jokes. Every Thursday night, for 5 years, she'd come over with a bottle of wine. We'd sit on my couch, pouring out our lives. My work frustrations, her dating disasters, my quiet worries about Justin and me drifting apart. She'd listen, nodding with what seemed like genuine sympathy, saying, "All marriages have phases, you just need to reconnect." She'd tell me how lucky I was to have Justin, how supportive he was, how I shouldn't take it for granted. I believed her. Questioning your best friend felt like questioning reality itself. My mother, Catherine, had died 6 years earlier. A car accident on a rainy night. Her car wrapped around a tree on a road she'd driven 1,000 times. The police said she was speeding, maybe fell asleep. A tragic accident. But Aunt Helen, my mother's older sister, she insisted something was wrong. Everyone brushed her off. Grief talking, they'd say. Helen was always difficult, always showing up with pamphlets about corporate corruption, warning about the wrong people. When she died alone, 9 months ago, surrounded by her filing cabinets and old newspapers, I felt guilty. Guilty for not visiting more, for not taking her seriously, for dismissing her as paranoid, when maybe she just saw patterns the rest of us were too comfortable to notice. I went to work, paid my bills, kept the apartment clean, tried to be a good wife. I did everything right, following the unwritten rules of middle-class respectability. I truly believe that if I worked hard, trusted the right people, played by the rules, I'd be safe. Protected from the chaos you only read about in headlines. I thought loyalty mattered, that the life I'd built was real, solid, mine. Looking back now, from this dingy motel room with its cigarette-stained walls and a bed that groaned with every movement, I see how utterly naive I was. How meticulously my entire life had been constructed by people who saw me not as a human being, but as a useful pawn. How every relationship I cherished had been a performance, designed to keep me compliant, oblivious. The apartment, the job, the marriage, the friendship, all of it built on foundations that were never real to begin with. But I didn't know that. Not yet. Not 7 months ago, believing in the stability of my routine, the protection of rules written by those who had no intention of following them. I didn't know Justin and Natalie had been planning my destruction since before my wedding. I didn't know my mother's death wasn't an accident. I didn't know Aunt Helen had spent her final years gathering proof while everyone called her crazy. I didn't know any of it. Not until that suitcase. Not until I'd already lost everything I thought mattered. By the way, if you're still with me, still hooked by this tangled web of secrets and lies, make sure to hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what happens next, and your support helps me share more unbelievable stories like this one. The suitcase sat on the motel bed beside me, the $7,000 spread out like evidence from a crime scene. Helen's note, soft from countless readings, was clutched in my hand. They'd been planning this since before my wedding. My mother's death wasn't an accident. Finish what she started before they silenced her. I needed to understand. How'd I missed it? How had I lived inside this lie for 7 years without seeing the truth? I let myself remember that Tuesday, 6 months ago, when my comfortable illusions finally shattered beyond repair. I'd woken up with a deep, unsettling nausea, not a physical sickness, but a wrongness that clawed at my chest. I tried to ignore it, going through the motions. Shower. Puffy, untouched toast. Getting dressed while Justin slept in, claiming a late meeting. By 10 a.m., sitting at my desk at Brennan Associates, staring at a dental office's social media calendar, I couldn't focus. My hands were cold, my heart raced. The dread grew. I walked into Marcus's office, told him I needed to go home. I expected an argument, but he just gave me this unreadable look and said, "Feel better," in a tone that made my skin crawl. Like he knew something I didn't. Like he was relieved I was leaving. The drive home was a blur. 20 minutes of silent traffic, my hands shaking on the wheel. I told myself it was just anxiety, a stomach bug, but the dread amplified with every block. When I pulled into our apartment parking lot, I saw it. Natalie's silver Honda Civic. In a visitor's spot. She had a key, but on a Tuesday afternoon? when Justin was supposed to be at work and she was supposed to be at her own apartment? It felt profoundly wrong. I sat there, engine running, desperately trying to rationalize it. Maybe they were planning a surprise for me. Maybe Justin came home sick and Natalie was checking on him. A dozen innocent explanations, each more desperate than the last. Finally, I cut the engine, walked across the lot, up 3 flights of stairs. I slipped my key into the lock as quietly as possible, not knowing why stealth felt necessary. The apartment was quiet. Not empty quiet, but the occupied kind. Then I heard it. Laughter. From our bedroom. Natalie's laughter. Not her usual friendly laugh. This was different. Lower. Intimate. The kind meant for someone specific. I knew. Somewhere deep down, beneath all the desperate rationalizations, I already knew. I crossed the living room. Each step felt like an eternity. I didn't knock. It was my bedroom. My apartment. I just turned the handle and pushed it open. There they were, Justin and Natalie, in my bed, tangled in the gray sheets I'd washed just days before, looking at each other with an undeniable intimacy. This wasn't a first for them. This was comfortable, routine. When they saw me, Natalie's first reaction wasn't shame. It was annoyance, as if I was the rude interruption. She didn't scramble to cover herself. She didn't apologize. She just looked at me with an expression that screamed, "Why are you being so dramatic? You should have seen this coming." Justin got out of bed, pulling on his jeans with a practiced efficiency that hit me harder than anything else. This wasn't a mistake. This was routine. He looked at me, not with guilt, but with impatience and relief. Like this confrontation was an inconvenience, but also something he'd been waiting for, because pretending had finally become tiresome. "Sam," he said, in that infuriatingly calm voice he used when he thought I was being unreasonable, "we need to talk about this like adults. This isn't what it looks like." The absurdity almost made me laugh. It was exactly what it looked like. He stood there, caught in the most obvious betrayal, and tried to gaslight me, tried to make me question my own eyes. Natalie sat up, clutching the sheet, a false modesty that was frankly insulting. "We didn't want you to find out this way," she said, as if there was a good way. "But honestly, Sam, this has been coming for a long time. You had to know things weren't working." The sheer arrogance stole my breath. Not just that she'd slept with my husband, but that she thought it was my fault for not seeing it sooner. That their betrayal was somehow justified. My voice came out strange, too calm, too detached. "How long?" Justin answered, emotionless, like he was discussing a terminated business deal. "Does it matter? Long enough that we're sure about this. Long enough that pretending became harder than being honest." Pretending. That word cut deeper than any knife. How long had he been pretending to love me? How long had every kiss, every "I love you," been a lie? And Natalie? How long had she sat on my couch, drinking my wine, listening to my worries, all while sleeping with him, giving me advice designed to keep me complacent while she was dismantling my life? I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Not then. I just turned, walked back into the living room, and started throwing clothes into a duffel bag. My laptop, chargers, toiletries, the practical things you need when your life collapses. Justin followed me, still shirtless, still trying to have his adult conversation. Still acting like this was a reasonable situation to be calmly resolved. I left without another word. Drove 3 miles to a coffee shop parking lot. And there, I finally let myself cry until I couldn't breathe. Then I called my cousin Emma, asked if I could sleep on her couch. That was 6 months ago. Now, sitting in this motel room with Helen's note and that $70,000, I understood. That Tuesday, it was worse than I ever imagined. The betrayal wasn't just personal. It was calculated, planned, part of something so much bigger, tying into my mother's death, into whatever Helen had been investigating. They've been playing a long game with my life as the board, and I've been too trusting, too naive, too desperate to believe in the stability of a normal life, to see it until it was too late. 5 days later, while I was still crashing on Emma's couch, Marcus called. His voice had that careful tone people use before delivering bad news. I told myself it was about a new client, maybe a performance review. I didn't dare think of the alternative. I showed up at 8:15 a.m., dressed in my best, trying to look professional, put together, even though inside I was barely holding myself upright. Marcus ushered me into his office, shuffled papers, wouldn't meet my eyes. "We're restructuring," he said, using that corporate jargon designed to sound impersonal. "Unfortunately, your position is being eliminated." He slid a severance package across the desk. My stomach plummeted. Not now. Not when everything else was already crumbling. Budget constraints? We just signed 3 new clients. I'd seen the quarterly reports. We weren't struggling. But his face was unmoving. "Decisions made at levels above my control, Samantha. It's final." I wanted to ask if this had anything to do with Justin, with the affair. But something in his eyes, a flicker of discomfort, told me it wouldn't matter. It would just make it more awkward. I took the folder, packed my desk in 20 minutes. No one made eye contact. My coworkers suddenly found their computer. Screens fascinating. By 9 a.m., I was walking out of Brennan & Associates, a cardboard box holding 4 years of my professional life and a severance package that barely covered 2 months' rent. Later, much later, I learned Marcus and Justin had been college roommates. That my job was never truly mine. It was always conditional. But that morning in the parking lot, I just felt the earth shift beneath me again. Another support ripped away. The divorce proceedings started 2 weeks after I lost my job. Justin hired Elizabeth Hartley, a shark known for her aggressive tactics. My court-appointed attorney, Gerald Stokes, was a tired man who seemed to have given up on justice years ago. Elizabeth painted me as unstable, irresponsible, dangerous. She used my job loss, my temporary housing situation, against me. Every detail of my collapsing life became ammunition to prove Justin deserved everything, and I deserved nothing. The judge, Robert Cunningham, a man in his late 50s, moved through his docket with chilling efficiency. Every motion Elizabeth filed, approved. Every request Gerald made for me, denied. Justin kept our apartment, even though I'd paid half for 5 years. He kept the car, the savings, the retirement funds. I was left with my clothes, my laptop, and enough money for 3 months in a cheap apartment. But the worst part? Watching Natalie take the stand. She wore a navy blue designer suit. The suit, the one we'd picked out together 2 years earlier. Now, she sat there, perfect posture, hands clasped, and lied with the conviction of someone well-rehearsed. She told Judge Cunningham I'd been unstable for months, that she'd worried about my concerning comments about self-harm, that I was paranoid and difficult. She claimed Justin had stayed with me out of obligation and fear, not love. Every word was a lie, but she delivered each one with perfect emotional calibration, her voice breaking just so, a performance of pained concern. When Gerald tried to cross-examine her about her relationship with Justin, Elizabeth objected instantly. The judge sustained it. No questions about their affair. I sat there, watching my best friend of over a decade systematically destroy what was left of my credibility. And I knew this was coordinated. The affair, the job loss, the divorce. All timed, all executed with a precision that transcended coincidence. After the divorce, Emma let me stay for 3 weeks. But her husband, David, started making pointed comments about me needing to get my life together. I'd hear him talking to Emma at night, his voice carrying through the thin walls. "She can't stay here indefinitely. You're not helping her." Emma would defend me, but I could hear the doubt, the exhaustion in her voice. I started looking for anywhere else to go. My former colleague offered her couch for 10 days, then decided my negative energy was bad for her mental health. A college friend offered a week, then remembered family visiting. Another friend's roommate complained about a stranger. Everyone was sympathetic, right up until sympathy became inconvenient. Until supporting me required actual sacrifice, not just kind words. Then, suddenly, they had prior commitments, family obligations, personal boundaries. I became someone else's problem. I understood it on some level. No one wants to live with someone else's crisis forever. But the speed with which people pulled away taught me a harsh truth. How conditional most relationships truly are. How quickly compassion expires when it becomes uncomfortable. When I finally scraped together enough money from freelance social media work, tiny, sporadic job for local businesses, To pay for a weekly rate at the Crossroads Motel, it felt less like hitting rock bottom and more like finding solid ground. At least the motel didn't pretend to care. Rita, at the front desk, didn't offer false comfort. Room 14 became my address. My home. The place where I'd eventually find that suitcase, explaining why my destruction had been so systematic, so complete. Room 14. It smelled like decades of cigarette smoke fighting a losing battle with industrial cleaner. The patterned carpet hid 1,000 stains. The bed sagged in the middle, like it had given up on supporting anyone's hopes. This was my life now. A room charged by the week in a motel where nobody asked questions because asking might require caring. I tried to establish a routine. Woke up early, made instant coffee, spent mornings applying for jobs. Dozens of applications a week. Customizing cover letters. Nothing. No calls. No rejection emails. Just silence. In the afternoons, I'd work my freelance gigs, managing Facebook pages, writing email newsletters. It paid poorly, sporadically, but just enough to cover the rent and some food. Dinner was usually instant ramen. Sometimes a canned soup. I'd eat, perched on the edge of that sagging bed, watching TV shows I didn't care about, just to fill the silence. My neighbors were ghosts. A long-haul trucker I'd nod at. A hospital worker whose curtains were always closed. A man who played country music just loud enough to be heard. I avoided the bathroom mirror. The woman staring back had my face, but her eyes were different. Hollow. Defeated. This was what betrayal looked like. I realized, with a crushing weight, that no one was coming to save me. Everyone who might have cared had already decided I was too much trouble. I'd been in room 14 for 3 weeks when I finally noticed it. I dropped my phone charger and it rolled under the bed frame. Getting on my hands and knees, reaching into that dusty space, my hand hit something solid. Something that shouldn't be there. I pulled it out into the meager light. An old suitcase. Battered brown leather, brass corners dulled with age. It looked like something from another era. A luggage tag, tied with twine, was attached to the handle. My hands began to shake as I turned it over. Samantha Marie Garrett. My full name. In Aunt Helen's precise, unmistakable handwriting. How had it gotten here? Helen had died 9 months ago. I'd stood at her grave. Everyone had said it was sad, but not surprising. She'd isolated herself with her conspiracy theories. Had she known I'd end up here? Left it with Rita at the front desk? The logistics seemed impossible, but the evidence was right there. My name. Helen's script. The suitcase was locked. I checked the bottom, and there was a small plastic bag taped underneath. Inside, a key. Helen, paranoid but practical. She had things in plain sight, left clues, trusting the right person would find them. I peeled off the tape, retrieved the key, and with hands that wouldn't stop trembling, I opened the latches. Inside, money. $70,000 in cash, bundled with rubber bands. Mostly hundreds, some 50s. It smelled faintly of mothballs of old books, like it had been stored away for years. Beneath the cash, a plane ticket. Portland, Oregon. Departure in 4 days. And under that, a note. Yellow legal paper. Helen's distinctive handwriting again. Samantha, this is just travel money. The real fortune is waiting at this address. Don't trust Justin. Don't trust Natalie. They've been planning this since before your wedding. Finish what your mother started before they silenced her. The truth is important. Use it wisely. I read those words 3 times. Each time, they felt more impossible, yet more true. Don't trust Justin. Don't trust Natalie. Planning this since before my wedding. My mother, Catherine, had died 6 years ago. Car accident. Rainy night. Everyone said it was tragic, nothing suspicious. But Helen had insisted something was wrong. She'd pull me aside at the funeral, whispered that my mother was investigating financial fraud at Meridian Pharmaceuticals, that her death was too convenient. She'd warned me to be careful. I dismissed it as grief. Everyone had. Helen always saw conspiracies. Now I sat on the floor of that motel room, staring at her words, and realized she wasn't just grieving. She was telling the truth. I spent that entire night in room 14, staring at the money, at the note, unable to sleep. Helen was forcing me to make a choice. By morning, I knew. I wasn't running. I was done being the person things happened to. I was done disappearing while the people who destroyed my life moved forward without consequence. I packed my duffel bag, some clothes, my laptop, the $70,000. I left a note for Rita. "Good luck," she'd said, which could have meant anything. The flight to Portland left early. I'd booked it with Helen's cash, trying not to think about what I was doing. Flying across the country to follow instructions from a dead-end everyone called paranoid, chasing a conspiracy that connected my husband's affair to my mother's death. It sounded insane. But the note was in my bag, the money was real, the ticket had my name. Crazy or not, I was going. Portland was gray, raining. A cold, heavy wetness that seeped into your bones. I rented a car, using more of Helen's cash. The address led me out of the city, to Lake Oswego, a suburb of quiet money and privacy. Helen's house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac. A small ranch, untouched since the 70s. Dark windows, overgrown lawn, cracked driveway. It screamed someone died here and no one knows what to do with it. I sat in the rental, engine running, wondering if I was brave enough. What if the truth was worse than the lies? I cut the engine, got out. The front door was locked, but Helen had left a second key in the suitcase. Inside, the air was stale, undisturbed. The house was exactly as I remembered. Books everywhere, filing cabinets, papers. But the note had directed me to the shed behind the house. I walked through the overgrown yard. The shed sat in the far corner, about 10 by 12 feet. And its locks? Newer. Industrial. The kind you use to protect something truly valuable. I used the third key Helen had left. It opened smoothly. Inside, the shed was pristine. Filing cabinets lined one wall, each drawer labeled with years, 1980s to last year. Boxes stacked with meticulous indexes. In the back corner, under a tarp and some paint cans, a trapdoor. I moved the cans. The trapdoor had a handle, a lock. The fourth key. It opened to darkness. I turned on my phone's flashlight and climbed down. It was a crawl space converted into a climate-controlled evidence room. 7 feet tall, 15 feet square. Lit by flickering LED strips. Cool, dry air from a humming dehumidifier. More filing cabinets, more boxes, a table with a laptop, an old cassette player. Photographs and documents, protected in plastic sleeves. Helen had spent years building this. A secret archive. She believed it was worth preserving, even if everyone called her crazy. I started with the photographs, arranged on the table like courtroom evidence. The first one I picked up made my hand shake so violently I almost dropped it. My mother, Catherine, standing between Justin and Natalie, at what was clearly a conference. Name tags, business casual, smiling. The banner in the background, Meridian Pharmaceuticals Annual Research Summit. The date, 8 years ago. 8 years. 2 full years before I supposedly met Justin by chance at a dinner party. 2 years before our relationship even began. I stare at that photo, my brain screaming for an explanation. A coincidence? A mislabel? But I knew. This wasn't coincidence. Justin hadn't met me by accident. He'd been placed in my life, deliberately cultivated by people who needed access to my mother. I'd been a target before I was a girlfriend. A mark before I was a wife. Every moment of intimacy, every declaration of love, every promise of our future, it had all been performance art, in service of something I was only now beginning to grasp. I set the photo down, reached for the cassette player. It was an old 80s model. Beside it, a stack of tapes, each labeled in Helen's hand. Justin Garrett and Richard Moss. March 2019. Discussion of Catherine Vaughn investigation status. My mother's name. My chest tightened. I loaded the tape, pressed play. Static. Then voices. My hands went cold. The first voice, Justin. The man whose voice I'd heard every day for 7 years. Telling me he loved me. Making promises. Now, I heard him discussing my mother like she was a problem to be solved. Catherine's getting too close, Justin said, his tone devoid of emotion. She's made copies of the trial data. Meeting someone at the FDA. I don't know who yet, but I'm working on finding out through Samantha. The second voice responded, older, authoritative, Richard Moss. We can't let this go public. The approvals we've secured are worth billions. If she exposes the data manipulation, We're looking at criminal charges, the end of the company. Can you contain her through the daughter? Justin replied, I've tried, but Catherine doesn't discuss work details with Samantha. She's protective, thinks she's keeping her daughter safe. It's actually making my job harder because Samantha doesn't know anything useful. Then Moss. Then we need to consider other options. More permanent solutions. We can't risk everything because one accountant developed a conscience. My blood ran cold. They were discussing killing my mother, planning it like a business decision. And Justin, my husband, was part of it. He'd used me to gather information. When that failed, he participated in planning her murder. I forced myself to press play again. There are ways to make it look accidental, Moss continued. Car accidents happen all the time, especially on rainy nights on dangerous roads. No one questions those. Justin, what about afterward? If Catherine dies, Samantha's going to be devastated. She'll lean on me for support, which gives me more access to her life. But there's also that Aunt Helen. She's paranoid and suspicious. Moss dismissed it. Nobody takes Helen Vaughn seriously. If she starts claiming Catherine's death wasn't an accident, people will just think she's paranoid again. The key is making sure there's nothing concrete for her to find. We clean up thoroughly, make sure the accident investigation is handled by people we can trust, and move on. The recording continued, detailing logistics, contingencies. My mother's murder discussed with the same tone people use to plan a vacation. When it ended, I sat in the silence, processing. Justin wasn't just having an affair. He'd been a plant from the beginning, placed in my life to monitor my mother's investigation into Meridian Pharmaceuticals. He courted me, proposed, married me, all part of strategy to access information that threatened their multi-billion-dollar fraud. And when using me didn't work, they made it look like an accident on a rainy night. I found more tapes. Conversations between Natalie and someone named Dr. Sarah Chin, Natalie's aunt, a senior researcher at Meridian. These recordings revealed Natalie had been assigned to befriend me after my mother's death, to ensure I remained isolated, manageable, to monitor me for any signs of investigating. Every Thursday wine night, it was surveillance. Every heart-to-heart conversation, data collection, our entire friendship, fabricated. I don't know how long I stayed in that crawl space. Hours. My back ached, my eyes burned. Finally, I found Helen's laptop, plugged in with a video file on the desktop for Samantha. I opened it. Helen's face filled the screen. She looked ill, drawn, but her eyes were sharp. Samantha, she began, her voice steady. If you're watching this, it means I'm dead and you found my archive. You're probably angry, confused, wondering why I didn't tell you while I was alive. She paused, took a sip of water. I tried. I warned you about Justin at your engagement party. Told you to be careful, that something felt wrong. To watch Natalie, to pay attention to the small things that didn't add up. You thought I was paranoid. You said I saw conspiracies everywhere. Her expression softened. And I don't blame you. I'd spent decades being the family eccentric. By then, you'd learned to dismiss me. Your mother, Catherine, was my best friend. When she discovered what Meridian was doing, she came to me first. We spent months building a case. Then, she died in that convenient accident. I knew exactly what had happened. Helen coughed, pulling away a tissue with blood on it. I've spent the last 6 years collecting this evidence. For your mother. For you. Because I couldn't let them get away with killing Catherine and destroying your life without consequences. She looked directly at the camera. You have 2 choices, Samantha. Just like your mother had. You can take the money I left you and disappear. Live comfortably, safely. No one would blame you. Or you can fight. Use everything I've collected and burn these people down. Expose Meridian. Expose Justin and Natalie. It won't be easy. You'll be threatened. In danger. But if you fight, you might actually win. And even if you don't, you'll make them pay a price. She smiled, that crooked smile I remembered. Either way, you'll have a story worth telling. Your mother would be proud of you no matter what you choose. But I think we both know which choice lets you sleep at night. Her expression became serious. I love you, Samantha. Don't let them win. Oh, and one more thing. Mountain Pacific Credit Union account number 77743. Password is your mother's employee number for Meridian. That's the real fortune. The $70,000 in the suitcase? Just travel money. Use what's in that account to fight or to run. But for God's sake, use it. The screen went black. I sat there, staring at the blank screen, for what felt like an eternity. Then I pulled out my phone, searched for Mountain Pacific Credit Union. 45 minutes later, navigating automated menus, I finally reached a human. I gave her the account number. She went silent. "Ma'am," she said, her voice suddenly crisp, professional. "I'm going to need to transfer you to our wealth management division. Please hold." The hold music was classical piano, sounding watery and distant. A woman named Patricia finally came on the line. She asked me to verify my identity, my mother's employee number. I gave it to her. Patricia paused. Then, in careful language, she explained, Helen had established a trust in my name. Stock portfolios, real estate, intellectual property, rights my mother had secured before her death. The total value? Approximately $14 million. Structured to protect it from legal challenges. Available only to me. $14 million. The words didn't sound real. They sounded like dialogue from someone else's life. I was sitting in a dead woman's underground archive, surrounded by evidence of conspiracy and murder, and now I had access to more money than I could properly comprehend. Helen hadn't just collected evidence. She'd built a financial fortress, allowing me to fight without being crushed by legal fees. She'd wrapped justice like a gift, with enough resources to actually achieve it. I chose to fight. Using Helen's files, I called Agent Maria Torres at the FBI's Portland field office. "This is Torres." I introduced myself. "My Aunt Helen Vaughn left me information about a case I think you've been trying to build about Meridian Pharmaceuticals." The silence on her end was deafening. "Where are you right now?" she finally asked. Her tone completely changed. "At my aunt's property." "Don't leave," she said. "Don't talk to anyone else. Don't touch anything. I'll be there in 40 minutes. She hung up. Maria arrived in 35. Late 40s, practical ponytail, jeans, a blazer with an FBI badge. She looked at me, part skepticism, part hope. "Show me," she said. I led her to the shed, down the ladder, into the archive. Her face changed as she took it all in. The cabinets, the boxes, the meticulous documentation. She put on latex gloves, pulled files, read with an intensity that showed me why Helen had trusted her. "Your aunt," Maria said after 20 minutes, "was either the most thorough investigator I've ever encountered, or she was completely brilliant. Probably both. This is enough. Enough to open a federal investigation. Conspiracy charges, fraud, possibly murder. Samantha, you just handed me a case that could take down a major pharmaceutical company." The investigation moved with a bureaucratic slowness Maria called normal for cases against multi-billion-dollar corporations. Subpoenas, warrants, freezing bank records. Former Meridian employees were interviewed. Whistleblowers emerged. Maria helped me find a small apartment in Portland, simple, modest. I used Helen's trust for rent and groceries, living simply while the investigation ground forward. I met with prosecutors, answering detailed questions, watching them build something substantial. Maria called with updates. "We're making progress. Don't talk to anyone." The waiting was harder than anything. I'd handed over everything, and now I was in limbo, hoping the machinery of justice would actually work. Then, 6 months after I first met Maria, things accelerated. Meridian Pharmaceuticals headquarters were raided by federal agents. Boxes carried out. Employees bewildered. The images flashed across national news. Richard Moss, the CEO, whose voice I'd heard on that tape discussing my mother's murder, was arrested. News cameras captured him, handcuffed, walking past his neighbors. Maria called me. Justin had been arrested at his tech startup. I watched the footage. He maintained his composure, but in his eyes, I saw fear mixed with disbelief. Natalie was arrested 2 days later at a Seattle coffee shop. She cried. Her attorney claimed she was manipulated, a victim, but I'd heard the recordings, seen the payments. She was a willing participant. Then came the news about Judge Robert Cunningham. He resigned, claiming he wanted more time with family. 3 weeks later, he was indicted for accepting bribes. Helen's files showed he'd bought a vacation home through a Meridian-linked trust. My divorce case was among the first reviewed. A new judge took 15 minutes to annul my marriage. It was declared invalid from the beginning due to fraud. I even received a formal apology from the judicial system. It didn't undo the damage, but it was acknowledgement. Official recognition that what had been done to me was profoundly wrong. The trials began 6 months after the arrests. Richard Moss's case was a media spectacle. Whistleblowers testified about Meridian's culture of fraud. Patients harmed by their drugs shared their stories. Forensic accountants showed how Moss personally profited from dangerous medications. 6 days later, the jury returned guilty verdicts on 17 counts: fraud, conspiracy, bribery, reckless endangerment. 23 years in federal prison. $40 million forfeited. He was 62. He'd die in prison. I watched from the back row. It wasn't satisfaction, not closure. More like a mathematical equation, finally balancing. All the variables falling into place. Justin's trial was quieter, more personal. I attended every day, sat in the same seat, watching prosecutors present evidence of his role in monitoring my mother, his participation in planning her murder, his 7-year marriage to me as an intelligence operation. The recordings Helen collected were played. His voice, discussing my mother like an obstacle. Bank records showed payments throughout our marriage. His defense tried to paint him as a low-level participant, manipulated. But the tapes showed an enthusiastic, willing strategist. The jury found him guilty: conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and racketeering. 15 years. When the verdict was read, Justin looked at me across the courtroom. Anger, resignation, disbelief. I looked back unwavering. I was done being intimidated by people who underestimated me. Natalie took a plea deal. 8 years in exchange for testimony against Dr. Sarah Chin and other Meridian employees. 6 months later, I received a letter from her. 3 pages prison stationery, full of apologies, explanations. She'd been young, desperate for money. Our friendship, she claimed, had become complicated because she'd genuinely grown to care. She asked if we could forgive each other. I read it once, sitting in my Portland apartment, sipping coffee. I felt nothing. It was self-justification, trying to rewrite history, trying to make herself a victim. She wanted absolution I wasn't willing to give. Some relationships can't be repaired. Forgiveness isn't owed to people who systematically destroyed your life just because they regret getting caught. The civil lawsuit against Meridian took another 2 years. They fought hard, but facing the weight of criminal convictions, they settled. $2.7 billion to patients harmed by their drugs. Federal monitoring for 15 years. My mother's estate received $12 million in wrongful death damages. I inherited it. I donated every dollar to organizations advocating for pharmaceutical safety and transparency. The money felt tainted. I already had enough from Helen's trust to live comfortably. Instead, I used Helen's trust to start the Vaughn Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to investigating pharmaceutical fraud, supporting whistleblowers. We hire investigators, fund legal defenses, publish reports that make corporations uncomfortable. It became my life's work, my way of channeling grief and anger into something productive, something that would have made my mother and Helen proud, something that turned their deaths into a legacy that helped people instead of just being tragic endings cut short by greed. I still think about room 14 at the Crossroads Motel, about that sagging bed, eating instant ramen, wondering if I'd ever climb out of that hole. I keep the receipt from my last week there in my wallet. A reminder, that rock bottom is real. That humiliation and betrayal can strip away everything you thought defined you. But they can't actually destroy you. Not unless you let them. Helen understood that. She spent her final years building this case, assembling these resources because she believed truth mattered more than comfort and justice more than safety. She was right. The paranoid and everyone dismissed was the only one who truly understood how the world worked. That powerful people don't stop being corrupt just because you trust them or play by rules they ignore. The final truth Helen left me proved prophetic in ways I'm still discovering. Fighting doesn't always lead to winning, but not fighting guarantees losing. I built a meaningful life from the ruins of a fraudulent one. Messy, complicated, and fundamentally honest. The kind of ending my mother and Helen would have appreciated. The kind of story that reminds people that patience and documentation can topple empires built on lies. And that sometimes the greatest revenge is simply refusing to let corrupt people erase you from the narrative they've constructed around their own importance. I'm not the woman I was when I found that suitcase under the motel bed. I'm stronger, more careful about trust, but also more certain about what truly matters. That woman didn't understand how much she could survive or how powerful she could become when everything else had been stripped away. I'm grateful I'm not her anymore. If this story of justice, resilience, and uncovering deep-seated secrets kept you captivated until the very end, show your support by hitting that like button right now. My favorite moment was definitely when I realized Aunt Helen, the paranoid one, had been right all along and had left me the tools to fight back. What was your favorite moment in this unbelievable journey? Tell me in the comments below. I really want to know what resonated with you.